Taylor Hallabuk.
Taylor Hallabuk. I make mistakes, big mistakes, every single day. And with all this talk of the census and counting, I was inspired to take an inventory of my mistakes. And although there were too many to count, a few do stand out. Like the time I reconnected with an old friend at her uncle's funeral, and I was hugging her goodbye, I said, "Oh, we should do this again sometime." Or this summer at lunch with a coworker, I told him I was really impressed that he finished his plate of food because I could never eat that much. Although the worst was freshman year when I asked the only not white girl in my class where she was studying from, and she said, Lancaster? It may sound like I was intentionally being rude or disrespectful, but actually I was exemplifying common meta-ignorance, explained by Dr. Medina of Northwestern University to mean not simply a wrong-headed attitude towards a specific other, but rather restricting one's sensitivity to differences and one's capacity to learn about them. In other words, we don't mean to be insensitive and make the situation uncomfortable for everyone, but sometimes we're insensitive and we make the situation uncomfortable for everyone. We make mistakes, but do we make them count? I argue that we are living in the era of meta-ignorance, and I fear promoting inclusion at the expense of our differences. However, by developing our capacity for vulnerability, our capacity for curiosity, and our capacity for humility, then we can achieve true inclusion within our communities. So what does it mean to have the capacity for vulnerability? It means we must let our guard down, become uncomfortable, and challenge what we think we know. Dr. Brown, professor and researcher of human connection, states, "Embracing our vulnerabilities is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up. When we give up on vulnerability, we fall into the trap of meta-ignorance that forces us to deny our differences, to not ask questions, and assume we all experience the world the same, treating each other as such." For example, the idea of colorblindness, commonly recognized as "I don't see color," but we do, no matter how much we'd like to say otherwise. It doesn't come from a place of hate, but a simple place of misunderstanding. However, it allows one to ignore the complexity of racial issues, it limits one's ability to appreciate individualism, and it minimizes the struggles of people of color. Meta-ignorance also affects the LGBT community by saying, "Oh, I don't care if you're gay, straight, bisexual, whatever," because in reality, we do. We want our differences to matter. We don't want to dismiss them. When we have the capacity to be vulnerable, we can challenge the idea that to be inclusive, we must see each other as the same, because true inclusion celebrates our differences. It doesn't hide them. This is where our capacity for curiosity is needed. But what stops us from being curious? Is it the fear of asking the wrong question? Dr. Phillips, a professor of human geography, suggests that being curious about others can bridge some of the divisions that exist within diverse societies. We must be curious about each other's perspectives and ask uncomfortable questions to better understand and empathize with our differences. For example, how would you respond? "Oh, I've heard of Hanukkah. That's like Jewish Christmas, right?" So, some of my best friends are black. And my personal favorite, "Oh, you're gay? I have a third cousin that I've talked to once that lives 6 states away that you've got to meet." Sound familiar? When we allow fear to override our curiosity, we avoid asking those difficult questions. We find it's just easier to sympathize with others and try to relate instead. Curiosity can be risky, but it is essential in creating true inclusion. For example, I remember my freshman year when I was harassed in a Sheetz bathroom. As I washed my hands, a lady approached me and angrily said, "Hey, you're not a girl." I can honestly say that I had no idea how to respond. I quickly began to dry my hands as she aggressively used her body weight to push me out of the bathroom before I was ready to leave. I left feeling humiliated, embarrassed, and invisible. Afterwards, I shared this story with my super feminine best friend, who I know only had the best intentions, but she tried really hard to relate by saying, "Oh, Taylor, I totally get it. Sometimes people think my voice is really deep." I nodded and awkwardly laughed along with her. The problem is that it's so ingrained in us to console each other by trying to relate and see everyone as the same, and that's great, but that's not entirely true. We all face different kinds of discrimination that are directly related to our different identities. Instead of my friend trying to relate, if she had the capacity to be curious and ask questions like, how are you feeling now? Are you okay? What can I do to help? Then I would have left feeling heard, accepted, and included. We need the capacity to be curious, to ask these uncomfortable questions, to truly be able to be inclusive of everyone's differences. Having vulnerability and curiosity gives us the tools we need to create our capacity for humility. I'm confident in saying that we all want an inclusive community at Juniata, but I'm also confident in saying that we make mistakes. But let's make our mistakes count. Let us be humble in our reaction to them. We have unintentionally adapted the mindset that we don't have the space to make mistakes. In class, we are only given points for correct answers instead of our process. In sports, we are only given recognition for scoring the point instead of producing the play. But most importantly, when trying to be an ally, we are only recognized for when we do it exactly right instead of our process of trying and getting it wrong. We show humility when we make our mistakes count. It's okay to be wrong. These mistakes are typically not intentional. The person was trying and just not getting it right. This could sound something like, but you're so nice, I could have never guessed you were a Republican. Your mood changes so fast, what are you, bipolar? Or, oh, you're pregnant. Oh, you're not. Famous American poet and civil rights activist Maya Angelou states, if you live, you will make mistakes. It's inevitable. But once you do and you see the mistake, then you forgive yourself and you say, well, if I had known better, I'd have done better. That's what counts. How does having the capacity for humility make us inclusive? Well, we accept others' mistakes by not getting angry, and we forgive our own mistakes by asking questions. We can choose to not let our mistakes define us. From this humility, we can create honest, open, and constructive dialogue to push away from meta-ignorance into a truly inclusive community. So, yes, I've made mistakes. I did accidentally tell my friend that we should catch up again at another one of her relatives' funerals. Be vulnerable. I need to recognize it was highly insensitive and apologize. I did unintentionally shame my coworker for his large lunch portions. Be curious. I need to ask myself, how can I do better? And I did accidentally assume that my friend of color from Lancaster was studying abroad. Be humble. Know better and do better. Let us all be inspired by this year's census to take inventory of ourselves, accept our mistakes, ask more questions, and develop our own personal goals for inclusion with empathy. We have the ability to push back against meta-ignorance and embrace our differences. I call on all of you to mess up, make a fool of yourself, be mortified, and learn. Let it build your capacity for vulnerability, curiosity, and humility. We owe it to ourselves, to our neighbors, and to our Juniata community to make our mistakes count.